How can you do a legitimate analysis of whether or not their funding should be restarted if the new board is not examining the fact that they got sped up in the line and fast-tracked for funding? It's in emails. They got fast-tracked for funding over other companies. How can you restart that? That's the essence of the problem here. And the new board isn't doing any investigation into that?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is most likely going to be a long one, depending if I've broken it up into a part 1, part 2. You'll obviously know from the title once I've uploaded this. But the video is actually in regards to a committee hearing that took place on Monday, and that was dealing with the STD scandal that has been plaguing Parliament right now. As of right now, Parliament has been paralyzed, as they've said, for the past 8 days because the Liberals have yet to release the documents to the RCMP. And in this committee hearing, you're going to see more Liberal shenanigans, scandals, the corruption, whatever the word you want to use. But prior to me actually starting this recording, some little update just happened where Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May have actually openly come out and had a little press today and said that the Liberals do need to release the documents, and whatever Karina Gould is saying is kind of nonsense.
What then do you make of the government argument that Conservatives are essentially playing political games right now?
Well, I mean, clearly everybody is. I don't understand why. I don't see, and I don't, unfortunately, I'm going to admit this right off the top, Michael, I don't buy Karina Gould's argument that this is a charter infringement. The Parliament of Canada has the right to request documents, and documents should be turned over to the Parliament of Canada when requested. I don't think that's open to debate. I think it's an overreach to suggest that turning over the documents would violate anyone's charter rights. By all means, the government should turn over the documents.
What are you willing to do to get the House business back on this table in Parliament? Right now, we're just dealing with this debate. What are you willing to do? Are you willing to work with the Liberals to give them a time allocation? How will we get back to parliamentary business?
So right now, the Liberals have to do two things. And we support making sure the government's held to account. They've got to release documents, release the documents. There's nothing that stops them from releasing those documents. They should move ahead and release those documents. They should be held to account. And secondly, the issue that relates to Minister Boissonnault. Absolutely, he should be held to account, and his colleagues should be held to account and brought before Parliament to explain why he's not justifying these text messages that make no sense. So the ball is in the government's court. They could do the right thing, move forward on accountability, and Parliament can move ahead.
So as you can see, things are not looking good for the Liberals. But another thing that Karina Gould keeps talking about is that this is the Conservatives doing this. No, clearly, all other parties of opposition, as I've mentioned before, were the ones that voted to have these documents seized by the House so that they could give to the RCMP. And now with these two other parties coming out, I'm sure the Bloc was probably going to say something as well. It's clear that it's not just the Conservative Party that is trying to take down the Liberals, or that they have a vendetta against them. All parties want to know why so much mismanagement happened with this STDC. And hopefully some criminal charges are going to be laid before Parliament gets prorogued, which, as from today's update from Northern Perspective, who got a little bit of insight, it sounds like that's going to happen within the week, which will put a stop to all investigations and all matters moving forward. And that's exactly what's happening in this committee hearing that you're about to see. From the opening, you could see a lot of party members were very frustrated with this witness, and this witness just stuck to the Liberal talking points to a T. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Morgan, for coming today. Have you, as an acting board member, I think that's the correct title of SDTC, have you had any meetings since you've been appointed to this position with the Minister of Industry or his office?
No, we have not.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to talk a bit about the review of the projects that's ongoing. It's one of your 3 areas. You mentioned that you're reviewing the projects identified for the Auditor General for eligibility. To your knowledge, has the Auditor General been back at all at SDTC looking at a broader list of transactions rather than just the 226 she looked at?
No, not to my knowledge.
She hasn't. So the Auditor General's then report stands, which was during the audit period, that she reviewed 226 of 420 transactions approved by the board.
That's correct. And one of her recommendations was that we review individually each of the projects that was undertaken during that audit period, and that is what we have. That is a process that we have started.
You're focused on the 226 transactions that were that were mentioned and discussed in the audit, not the 420 in the audit period?
We are focused on all of the projects that were put in place during the period of the audit. So I believe that the Auditor General took a sample of projects and reviewed them, but we are reviewing all of those projects, all of the projects.
Right. So that,
yes.
According to the Auditor General's report, that's 420 projects. So you're reviewing them all for eligibility?
For eligibility, yes, as per the recommendation of the Auditor General.
And when you look at the eligibility, besides I'm presuming you're talking about eligibility relative to the contribution agreements.
Yes, that's correct.
Are you looking at eligibility relative to conflict of interest?
We're looking at eligibility. We're following the Auditor General's recommendation, which was to review every project for eligibility, and we have hired independent firms to assess. Two individuals, independent, will assess each project for eligibility, and that's per the Auditor General's recommendation.
That's true, but as a person overseeing the governance of this organization, I would think that you would be more concerned overall, not just with the eligibility, but the overall issues that have been identified in the culture of conflict of interest in the organization, at the board and in management, and most of those management are still there. In the culture of conflict of interest, the 226 projects that the Auditor General audited out of the 420, 82% of them were conflicted. 82% of board member approved transactions were conflicted by board members. To me, that goes to an eligibility issue as well, because there is no way those 9 directors represented 82% of the clean technology community in Canada. So are you explaining to me that the board and the review that's going on with the third party isn't delving into the issue at all of the conflicts of interest that were identified, and whether or not these companies got preferential treatment because of their connection with board members? That's not part of the review?
Mr. Chair, a number of the recommendations of the Auditor General were related to strengthening the conflict of interest provisions of SDTC, and those recommendations have been implemented. The board is overseeing the governance of SDTC, and we're doing that with much strengthened conflict of interest reporting provisions going forward. In terms of the eligibility reviews, we're following the advice of the Auditor General, which is to review each project for eligibility.
But the whole reason we're here, and the whole reason we have a production of documents motion that got approved by the majority of the House of Commons members of Parliament to be collected, unredacted, is that in that audit period, those 420 transactions approved by board members, that represents $856 million of taxpayer money. The Auditor General only looked at half of that and found $330 million were conflicted and $59 million was ineligible. That's almost $400 million of $800 million was conflicted or spent incorrectly. So it boggles my mind that in trying to clean up the governance that the minister said was his goal, with transferring it, getting rid of the board, having a new board, that part of that process is saying, look, folks, these projects have a problem. They are conflicted. These board members, like, the project may be legitimate, but how they got in and how they got funding was clearly preferential treatment over that of other businesses in the clean technology space that didn't get funding. And for that not to be part of the review boggles my mind. So will you commit here that you will mandate to that third party that you have doing it to ensure that conflict of interest, which was a big part of the Auditor General's report, is part of your review?
Mr. Chair, we have independent advice on conflict of interest and provisions of the SDTC. And as we go forward, we will be taking advice on conflict of interest issues as well, particularly as we look at reviews and as we look at restarting funding for projects.
So as I'm listening to this woman speaking, her answers seem very kind of programmed, pre-planned, written down type of thing. And as you notice, she looks down from time to time as if she's reading off an answer. And so I decided to do a little digging into who this woman actually is. And to no surprise, she was a formal Liberal up until 2019. Says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today announced the following change in the senior ranks of the public service. Martha Morgan, that's the lady there, currently Deputy Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenships, becomes the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs effective May 6, 2019. And if you actually check out her profile, she's been part of the government since 1993. She was a Privy Council officer, moved up in the ranks up until 2016. She was the Deputy Minister of Immigration, as it stated, and then switched to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs as of 2019. From then on, I guess she left the government and now she's running these programs. But this is why I'm not so surprised with the way she's answering. And this is going to be something that's pointed out later on by the Bloc. She actually says that this lady has talking points from the government. But now we're going to go to Desjardins, the NDP member. And this is where the frustration begins because this woman is very programmed to answer a certain way.
I do want to now transition to a very serious issue that we had received relative to your opening statement as well, the Tetro report, McCarthy Tetro report. In that report, of course, it suggests it was a solution in some ways of the government to try to identify whether or not there was credibility to some serious HR concerns that were made aware by the government. It was present to us in this committee where we had an individual, the whistleblower. We identified them in this committee as Witness 1. Witness 1 had testified at this committee that there was serious and long-standing issues with human resource management within SDTC. Within the report, of course, or prior to the report being commissioned by the government, there was many NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that were signed by employees, former employees, or even current employees of SDTC. And he had stated, the whistleblower that is, that these NDAs had limited the ability of employees to be truthful and fully transparent in the work related to the McCarthy Tetro report. Do you understand what the whistleblower is saying here? And can you see that there's an obvious conflict between the ability to testify to one's own truth experience while also being held to an NDA? Do you understand that conflict?
Mr. Chair, these allegations were comprehensively investigated by McCarthy Tetro, and their report is a matter of public record. McCarthy Tetro had complete access to all current and former employees, and they have published a comprehensive report which will guide us along with the report of the Auditor General and the report of the Office of the Commissioner of Ethics going forward.
Do you understand the NDA requirements and how they could play a role in skewing the results of the McCarthy Tetro report?
Mr. Chair, McCarthy Tetro his report is a matter of public record, and they had complete access to all current and previous employees. Do you understand that an employee could not testify to their experience during the McCarthy Tetro report? Do you understand that? Mr. Chair, we are taking the McCarthy Tetro report very seriously. It was an independent report that was
But you're not taking it
conducted
seriously,
over
Ms.
time.
Morgan. I just asked you a very credible conflict.
Mr. Desjardins, that is the time.
Thank you very much.
So as you can see there, very crystal clear, she was asked an individual question 3 separate times, and she had to look down each time at the scripted answer that she was given, either by some lawyer, legalese team, or the Liberals, or a government entity. Who knows? But she clearly doesn't have the good intentions of coming here to answer questions honestly. She's just going to answer these programmed answers that she's been given. And as the committee continues to ask her different questions, they get more and more irate, like Michael Cooper, who's next. He asks her some simple questions that have a yes and no answer to it, and she can't even do that.
Beginning our second round, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Morgan, this is a yes or no question. I take it from your testimony that with respect to the reassessment process that is underway with respect to each of the projects that had been approved by the previous corrupt board, the scope of the reassessments are to determine whether those projects satisfy the enhanced contribution agreement in order to be eligible for funding, but does not include reviewing conflicts of interest that may have resulted in those projects receiving funding by the previous corrupt board. Is that correct, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, we are reviewing the projects independently to assess their eligibility as recommended by the Auditor General.
No, I asked specifically with respect to conflicts of interest, wrongdoing, and so on, because the Auditor General found 186 conflicts, $330 million that went out the door involving conflicts, including $76 million tax dollars, in which board members actually deliberated and voted on approving funding that went into companies that they had interest in. Is that part of the reassessment process, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, if fraud or wrongdoing is found as part of our review of these projects, the board will take appropriate action.
Well, Ms. Morgan, how is it possible to identify fraud and wrongdoing if that's not part of the reassessment process?
Mr. Chair, there are strength and conflict of interest provisions that have been put in place, and no funding will be restarted without those conflict of interest issues also being taken into account. So we're looking at the eligibility reviews by independent assessors, and we're looking at all of the issues before we restart. And should we find any evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, of course the board will take appropriate action.
Why is that not part of the reassessment process?
Mr. Chair, the reassessment process that we're talking about vis-a-vis eligibility is what was recommended by the Auditor General, and we've put that in place with independent reviewers, 2 independent reviewers per project, to assess eligibility.
Okay,
that was the recommendation that the Auditor General made.
It's very clear, or it seems to be clear, that a priority is to get funding out the door, but much less of a priority is rooting out the corruption and conflicts involving hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. Now, Ms. Doyle stated, if we find any evidence of wrongdoing on the part of a recipient, the board will take action on recovery. What action has been taken to date to recover monies that improperly went out the door where there was wrongdoing? Because we already know of instances where that has been clearly established. What steps have been taken?
Mr. Chair, the process of reviewing the projects for eligibility is really at the beginning stage, and we've started to review those projects. We are looking at a process to restart funding that will address issues of eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved projects. And we will only restart funding, Mr. Chair, in cases where these projects have been approved for eligibility independently, and the board has had a very close look at them, as the Auditor General has recommended.
Well, I asked Ms. Doyle, and I didn't receive a satisfactory answer, that in the case of Annette Verscheren, the former chair of the board, $220,000 went improperly out the door, funneled into her own company. This was identified in the Auditor General's report, and Ms. Verscheren has been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner of violating the Conflict of Interest Act in respect of those payments. It's been months since Ms. Verscheren has been found guilty. What is the interim board doing to recover those funds? What is the interim board waiting for in that clear black and white case of corruption and conflict?
Mr. Chair, it's very important that we follow a clear and transparent process, and that is what the board has put in place. We will have independent reviews, 2 independent reviews for process per project. We'll assess each project for eligibility.
For eligibility, but not conflicts and corruption.
We're conducting these reviews as per the Auditor General's report.
Thank you. That is your time.
So now this is the second time that she's been asked if these reviews and investigations are going to incorporate the conflict of interest, not just eligibility, because even if you find them eligible and they qualify, if there's a conflict of interest, why would that then allow them to be eligible? So you should be looking at if there's potential conflict of interests. This lady, again, just gives these programmed answers. However, now we're going to move to a Liberal who hasn't been part of the committee for a very long time. I think this is maybe his third or fifth participation. And he decides to bring up the NDA thing as if he's got a gotcha on them.
Up next, Mr. Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I want to start because if one were listening to this meeting, one might be confused. And so I just want to make sure that I've got some things clear in my mind. When McCarthy did its review of the workplace, there's been some suggestion that employees could not be forthcoming because they were unable to speak to the issue due to NDAs. My understanding, though, based on the evidence we've received, is that NDAs were not a barrier to employees being full and forthcoming with that review. Can you just clarify once and for all for us?
McCarthy Tetro, when it did its independent report, had complete access to all current and former employees, and all confidentiality provisions were waived.
Oh, is that so? Because that's a lot different from what Witness 1 says, and I find Witness 1 way more credible than she's coming off. Even when the Liberals pushed back during Witness 1's testimony, and this is the clip that I played earlier where they said you can't allow him to do this when he's laying it out, stuff that he pushes back with, they can't even refute. They don't have a response for that, and he even tells them, why don't they just remove the NDAs then? Why publish only 7 pages out of this 3,000-page investigation? Prove that the NDAs weren't a factor in it, and the Liberals couldn't say anything.
And McCarthy Tetro was tasked with conducting a fact-finding review of alleged breaches of labor and employment practices and policies at SDTC. The allegations that you've brought forward today seemingly fit exactly with McCarthy's mandate. NDAs were waived, so the participants, both invited and voluntary, could speak freely about their past or current employer. Did you or anyone from the group of fellow whistleblowers participate in the review?
Oh, I participated. I found it to be useless. For example, if you read what the McCarthy Tetro disclaimer says, it says that none of the testimony is to actually be relied on from any of the employees. When employees within SDTC or outside were asking to have their NDAs removed, that actually went directly to the executives. So employees who are inside SDTC were actually named, and executives who should have who shouldn't have known that they were actually asking to speak were then actually, like, their identities were released by McCarthy. How do you expect anything truthful to happen when McCarthy effectively released the names of every current and former employee to the same executives that they are trying to, bring some transparency against?
I'd like to go back to following up Ms. Bradford's comment about how she had a hard time squaring your testimony with the conclusions of the McCarthy review. There are clear conclusions, 62 interviews with 3,000 pages of documents that differ from your view. How can you explain this discrepancy?
As I mentioned before, I would ask for you to give me an example of an organization that gets shut down that had a good culture. If the McCarthy Tetro report is actually true, why don't they release the report instead of 7 slides with random statements? If they truly say that they've looked into these situations, why is there no public proof that they did, and why is there no public proof that they have actual evidence that go against these statements? Just because a lawyer or a law firm says that these statements are incorrect, if they're not providing evidence, how are you attacking me saying that the culture is good when the evidence isn't actually there. Again, maybe I'll ask this for the minister. Why doesn't he actually get rid of everyone's NDA and everyone can hear the stories themselves? Because as of right now, the NDAs are off. So if you are so obsessed with disproving my claim, take off everyone's NDAs and let the public find out exactly what happened.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Take off the NDAs, let the public see what actually happened, or better yet, send all the documents unredacted to the RCMP and let's see how many criminal charges are laid out. Because I bet you there's going to be no confusion with whether the NDA was a reason or not a reason if we just got those unredacted documents. But sticking with the NDA, it goes back to Desjardins, who then doubles down and tries to get her to answer again on this. She chooses to give this robot answer again, and now he's looking at the chair to kind of force her in a way to answer the question. Williamson, I love him as a chair, and he's very to the book. However, I'm not a super fan of how he just told her if she doesn't know, she could just say that. Because then she starts using that throughout the rest of the committee hearing. At certain points, she'll just be like, "Oh, I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you."
Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to return now to the issues present to us relative to a whistleblower, Witness 1's report to this committee for the purpose of our study. In that testimony that not all members of this committee were subject to, they made very serious and damning concerns worth this committee's investigation. Part of those concerns were serious issues related to racism, sexism, homophobia, and real issues of systemic violence within SDTC. These are serious, and they require serious investigation. And I think we need to talk about this, how we speak about whistleblowers, how we work with whistleblowers. Just this morning, for example, we have the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner asking for more money because of just the sheer volume of concerns related to the Liberal government and their serious issues within the public service. And so we do need to take more credible the real concerns of those who work in the public service when they come forward with concerns. It's a very legitimate and regular part of being a government. You should be able to investigate these with more serious concern. The McCarthy Tetro report was rejected by the whistleblower, by the Witness 1, as you might know. And they were rejected because of the specific issue of NDAs. You mentioned that all confidentiality was waived. Did that include non-disclosure agreements by the public or by the SDTC employees? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, our focus
Ms. Morgan, please. I've asked you several times.
Mandate.
Is it do you know that these NDAs are the question I'm asking about? You just said, in response to one of my colleagues, that all confidentiality was waived. The purpose of that statement is to try to confiscate what I'm trying to ask you, which is a very specific question. And Mr. Chair, I'll look to your support on this because it's now several times I've asked this question. Has the NDAs been waived for the purpose of the McCarthy Tetro report? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, these allegations were comprehensively reviewed. McCarthy Tetro had complete access to all current and former employees.
Mr. Chair, can you please, I've asked it very clearly.
Ms. Morgan, you are entitled, and it's perfectly acceptable to say, if you don't know, you don't know, and you can get back to us. But that's a fine answer, and we'll certainly accept it. But as you can see, several witnesses are becoming a little are concerned their answers, the questions aren't being answered. And as I said, you're welcome to say you can look into it, you'll respond to us later. It is a pretty clear question, and I would ask you to try again, please.
Be happy to get back to the committee with more information on
So
that.
just to clarify, you're not sure?
Mr. Desjardins?
Not sure.
Yeah, hold on, Mr. Desjardins. I will let you ask what you would like. Ms. Morgan is going to get back to us, which I think is a suitable answer. She doesn't need to say any more than that. She's going to get back to us on that. So could you be clear what question you would like Ms. Morgan and her team to respond to?
Ms. Morgan, you asked, you responded to a question. You said in that response that all confidentiality was waived. I want support for that claim that you've made to this committee by way of a very direct answer to my very direct question. Were the NDAs that were signed by SDTC employees waived for the purpose of the McCarthy Tetro report?
Thank
Can
you.
you please respond?
Thank you very much.
I gotta give it to Mr. Desjardins. He stuck with it. He really tried to get the answer to that. I'll give him props where props are due. However, now this is where things really get off the rails, and you start to see the Liberals trying to throw in their little corruption, their shenanigans here, as Mr. Brock is now going to be asking questions. She chooses to skirt around the answer. He starts to get frustrated, and then the Liberals start interjecting, saying, well, just allow her to answer, when that's all they've been doing, and she's been giving them these ring around the rosy answers. And then the Bloc comes in and addresses it.
Up next is Mr. Brock for 5 minutes, please.
You talked about taking appropriate action if you discover fraudulent or wrongdoing. We clearly have evidence of Ms. Sheeran enriching herself in decision-making that resulted in a finding of breaching the Conflict of Interest Act. I also heard you say that you will take steps to recover money. That decision by the Ethics Commissioner was made several months ago. You've been on the new board since June the 4th. Why haven't you taken any action?
Mr. Chair, in the past 4 months, the board has focused on taking...
Not my question, Ms. Morgan. Why have you not taken action on behalf of the Canadian taxpayer to recover the ill-gotten gains of Ms. Sheeran? Why have you not started that process? I don't care about your other priorities. I know that's understandable, okay? But you also have a mandate to recover funds. If that mandate didn't come from the minister himself, I'm listening to your responses. That mandate is part of the new governance system. Why have you not taken steps to recover money for the taxpayer?
Mr. Chair, it has taken a few months for the board to get up and running and start to put into place the processes to deliver on its mandate.
Okay, are you getting legal advice, ma'am? Are you getting legal advice from a law firm as to how that process should take place to recover funds, yes or no?
We have established a clear process. We have engaged advice. We have engaged independent reviewers.
Instead of speaking in generalities, Ms. Morgan, it's my time. Instead of speaking in generalities, please let's start a refreshing approach and answer a direct question. Direct question is this: are you getting legal advice as to what process should be followed to recover money? Yes or no? And if you say yes, which law firm is giving you that advice?
Mr. Chair, we have indicated to the committee that if we find evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, the board will take action.
Again, Chair, she refuses to answer the
Mr.
question.
Chair.
Okay, one second. Yes, Monsieur, point of order.
I would appreciate if time could be given to Ms. Morgan to complete her answer.
Happy to if she actually answered the question.
Mr. Brock, just 1 second. Oui, madame,
Yes. Pour cet appel au règlement, je trouve vraiment décevant que I think it's very disturbing to see that this witness is not answering any questions that require a yes or a no and is just playing a tape that I'm sure government officials have given her to play. It's important. We have questions. She should answer them as specifically as possible, respecting the time as well as the work that we're carrying out here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oui, monsieur Drouin. Appel au règlement encore?
Another point of order. Look, I would just like to ensure that we respect our witnesses. If we don't hear the answers, it can be a little frustrating, but, we do have to hold back as parliamentarians. We need to respect the witnesses, and with due respect for my colleagues as well. I do understand the frustration and feel it, but, he's asking a question, and he would like an answer, even, we don't get the answer. That's not my fault.
No, mais, all right. So I think so you can, Ms. Morgan, you can see the position I'm in. There is some frustration where there are specific questions, but the responses are general in nature. Is this something you'd like to answer or come back to us on with a specific question to Mr. Brock about is there, Mr. Brock? Do you want to very specific, short? I don't want any preamble.
Yes,
it is
there's no preamble.
Yes.
Are you receiving legal advice about the process regarding recovery? If the answer is yes, which firm is giving you advice?
Thank
very,
you.
Very,
is this something
general.
you could either answer or come back to us with an answer
Yes,
on, please?
yes, Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to answer. Of course, we are receiving legal advice with respect to all of our next steps, including recoveries, and I would be pleased to get back to you with the name of the law firm. I just can't recall at the moment.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
This woman is just so irritating to watch. If she had just given an answer like that to Larry Brock's question, saying, yes, we are getting legal advice, I can't remember the name of the law firm currently, but I can get back to you on that, none of this would have escalated. However, as you can see, now it's the NDP who's asked the chair to intervene. The Bloc has also pointed out to the chair that she's not answering properly, and the Conservatives, the only people who are fine with the way that she's answering, and let's give her the time to answer, are the Liberals. I wonder why. Like, these guys are so corrupt. And even the next person to talk, who's a Liberal, Mrs. Bradford, she doesn't even utilize the whole time asking questions. She would like to, again, try to disprove the whole NDA thing by reading this statement into the record.
Up next is Ms. Bradford. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Morgan, for being with us today. So in the interest of clearing up some obvious confusion here for anyone watching at home, I would just like to read into the record. McCarthy wrote on its website on December 1st, 2023, when it launched its review. SDTC has agreed that to facilitate the review, any employee or former employee can speak freely to McCarthy Tetro without fear of reprisal and without being considered as violating any applicable settlement agreements or non-disclosure agreements. So now, in the public record on the ISED website, anyone can go on and see McCarthy's fact-finding review. It states, McCarthy prepared a consent form for current and former employees, which permitted the disclosure, use of information, of personal information in a manner consistent with the review and law. The consent form was not mandatory for participation. McCarthy also prepared a waiver form to encourage participation by releasing participants from any specific confidential information owed to SDTC. This waiver form was not mandatory for participation. So I just want to get that on the record because there's been a lot of back and forth and confusion with this.
Actually, no, there was no confusion. Witness 1 was very clear with what he stated. You're telling me that McCartney's coming out saying they had a consent form and a waiver form that was optional for the individuals to sign or not sign, that would have cleared them of the NDA but not the NDA? Like, these guys are still under NDAs, yet these consent and waiver forms would have cleared them of the NDAs. How would that have been possible if they didn't go to the executives of STDC and ask them to remove those non-disclosures from the individuals, which then solidifies what Witness 1 was saying, that the executives would then know which individuals were there to talk about them. Like, I don't think these guys are getting what they're saying. But moving on from the Liberal, we're going back to Perkins. He's going to go back at her, and this was where the opening clip was from in this set of questions.
Again, Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to the issue, if I could, Ms. Morgan. You've said if the companies have been found to do something criminal, I suspect you're not going to find the companies did anything criminal. The issue is the directors. Are you and is the acting board doing an investigation into the culture of conflict of interest that created 82% of the transactions being conflicted? Because that's the issue. The issue isn't that some of these companies may have been a reasonable company. It's just that they got preferred access to the funding because of that. And I'll share with you an example. The Sharon Center, the chair sought $6.8 million for her own Sharon Center at Cape Breton University. It did get rejected eventually after being fast-tracked by the VP Investments. VP of Investments at SDTC fast-tracked that application. That person is now the acting president, by the way, of SDTC. He fast-tracked it. But when it got rejected in the Investment Committee for Conflict of Interest, that same person wrote to staff and said, we will help find funding for the Visharan Center for other parts of government. And then the Visharan Center then went on obviously the employees' work, to get $10 million from ISED and ACOA to help the Visharan Center. So the issue is how board members approved in their little cabal each other's projects as they declared at the beginning of each board meeting, you know, Larry's got a conflict of this, Rick's got a conflict of that, and these are all the conflict. Now, Larry will leave when his one conflict happens, but we'll then approve it, and then I'll leave when my conflict is up. That's how it works when 82% of the transactions are conflicted. They must have had trouble getting quorum because they were so conflicted. So my question is, are you, as a acting board member, brought in by this minister, Minister Champagne, who said he was going to clean the place up, not engaging anyone to examine, since you've already said the Auditor General's not in again, to examine that culture of conflict of interest in the board that led to these $330 million being given to companies these people had an interest in?
Mr. Chair, the current board does not have any conflicts of interest with sustainability.
I didn't. Sorry, this is the problem why we're having these issues with your answers. I didn't ask about the current board. I asked about the past board. How can you do an analysis of whether or not a company is eligible in the restart of this if you haven't done an investigation into the governance conflicts of interest in this organization?
Mr. Chair, in terms of the organization, the Auditor General made a number of recommendations about exactly the issue that the member is referring to, which is the culture and the processes around conflict of interest. And those elements of the Auditor General's report, which were aimed at strengthening reporting and strengthening disclosure, those elements of the Auditor General's report have been implemented.
I'm not talking, I'm sorry, you're not listening to my question. My question is about the restart of funding to these organizations, many of whom, 82%, got preferential treatment. How can you do a legitimate analysis of whether or not their funding should be restarted if the new board is not examining the fact that they got sped up in the line and fast-tracked for funding? It's in emails. They got fast-tracked for funding over other companies. How can you restart that? That's the essence of the problem here. And the new board isn't doing any investigation into that?
Mr. Chair, as we consider our process to restart funding, we will address issues of both eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved projects.
Thank you very much.
To be honest, it doesn't seem like this new board is doing much of anything. The way this lady's answering is it's as if she's grabbing some spaghetti and just throwing it at the wall and hoping something sticks. But when you're kind of going against these guys like Perkins and Cooper and Brock and even Michael Barrett, these guys take precise notes. They know what kind of questions that they're asking, and they're looking for specific answers. And when you try to give them these ring around the rosy answers, it's not going to cut it. Especially, as you're going to see with Cooper coming up, he asks her a question based off something she said much earlier in the committee, and obviously her answer does not align with that. And when he doubles down on that, then the Liberals get all in their feelings. They start to intervene, and she just can't seem to answer the question.
Turning now to Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Morgan, you have repeatedly said that where there is evidence of fraud or wrongdoing on the part of recipients, that will be considered for the purposes of eligibility. You emphasized time and again the word recipient. Are you considering conflicts of interest on the part of the former corrupt board members in assessing eligibility for projects? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, the process that we've developed to look at projects in terms of funding restart, which is primarily what we're talking about, will
Ms.
address
Morgan,
both
my time
issues
is
of
limited, and I asked you a
eligibility
very
and
specific
conflict of
question
interest.
that you haven't answered, and it's an hour and a half into the hearing. You've been asked this question or something in these terms, but you haven't actually given a direct answer.
Mr. Crew, just a reminder, while I appreciate Ms. Morgan is here to answer questions, Ms. Morgan, I will remind you that the time is the members, and I know there's always back and forth when they insist on ending your answer for whatever reason. If you could just yield to them, please. And I appreciate you've been doing that generally. Time is limited, and we are coming to the end. So, Mr. Cooper, you have 4 minutes. You can restate the question, but I think it was heard. Do you want to? Time is yours. Four minutes.
Yes or no? Are conflicts of interest on the part of the former corrupt board being considered, being assessed for the purpose of eligibility of those very projects that were approved and went out the door involving conflicts of interest of those board members? Yes or no?
As we look at the process to restart funding, we will address issues of eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved projects.
So the answer to that is yes or no?
We will look at both eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved process as we look at
You were very
restart of
specific in
program
using
funding.
the word recipient before. Now I'm asking you whether you are also considering conflicts involving board members. You have refused to answer yes or no on that very specific question. So I'll put it to you again, yes or no.
Mr. Chair, as we look at different issues, different considerations come into play, and vis-a-vis
Yes
recoveries.
or no?
Point of order,
of order,
please.
Chair.
Point of order.
Yes, Ms. Yep.
Should let the witness answer and not badger her, give her the time to, be able to answer in fullness, please.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Well, I have another point of order, Ms. Khalid, or Ms. Yip. Yes, all right. So, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 3 minutes. Look, I'll just say this to all members on both sides. I appreciate that direct answers are expected. Mr. Cooper is trying to narrow their response. He's entitled to do that. And Mr. Cooper, I turn the floor back to you, please, for 3 minutes.
I'm awaiting an answer to a yes or no question. She's wasting my time. Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, these are complex and nuanced issues, and they need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis under the process that we've established.
So you can't give a yes or no answer as to whether that is specifically being considered. So I'll take it as a no. So which is astounding. And so what it means is that projects that got ahead of the queue because of corrupt board members will continue to reap the benefits of the corruption at
Point of order, Mr.
SDTC
Chair.
that led to the
Point of order,
funds
yes.
and a damning Auditor General's
Yes,
report.
Mr. Durian.
I recognize that it's the honourable member's time, but he's putting words into the witness's mouth that has not been said publicly.
Well, that is what I take from her testimony.
So I didn't catch the putting words. I think Mr. Cooper is summarizing how he sees it. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 2:20.
So in essence, it's not a priority to clean up corruption. It's not a priority to clean up the conflicts. It's in fact, what is a priority is the status quo, to get money out the door as quickly as possible. It's really, really outrageous. Now, you said that you are in charge of, or part of your responsibility on the interim board is to oversee transparency with respect to transfer to the NRC. The SDTC every quarter published all funding decisions, project by project. Will that transparency continue when SDTC projects are transferred to the NRC? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to that issue. We're in the process of discussion with the NRC.
Ms. Morgan, you said that your role is to oversee the transfer to the NRC. That is your primary focus as a board member, one of the 3 board members. You said transparency is a priority. I cited an example where there actually was a level of transparency at SDTC, and I'm asking you, will that continue? And if you can't answer that, are you at least taking steps to see that it will continue?
Mr. Chair, we've got a process in place where we're working through all of these issues
I
with
asked
the NRC.
you a simple question, and you dodge, once again, talking in generalities about process. Answer the question. I asked you very specifically about quarterly reports from SDTC.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Khalid.
I don't think we're in the business of embarrassing or harassing witnesses that come before this committee.
Look, Ms. Khalid, I appreciate this is frustrating, and these are good questions. And we're a parliamentary committee where
They are not
which the witness can refute. Mr. Cooper's being very specific with respect to his questions, and he is entitled to pose them. I would hope we would get an answer. But when he doesn't get an answer, he is entitled to drill down further. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor.
Point of order, actually.
Yes, Mr.
When you say answer the question, you're not addressing that through the chair. I think that's what my colleague, Ms. Khalid,
all right.
is trying
Mr.
to
Cooper,
say.
then if you could send your questions through the appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, can the witness answer the question?
Chair, the NRC is an independent organization, and I'm sure that they will be very transparent. But I can't answer the specific question about whether they will follow exactly the same transparency procedures as SDTC.
Again, it's astounding, but you can't assure that there would be at least an equivalent level of transparency, but there in fact might be less transparency, which would completely undermine one of the purported objectives of moving SDTC over to the NRC, that there would be less transparency, not more transparency. I think that what is going on, Mr. Chair, is that the minister is working to ensure that there will not be public scrutiny, but there won't be parliamentary scrutiny in the future of the kind of corruption that has been identified in SDTC.
Thank
it's
you.
about burying the corruption going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Now, if you're not sure what Michael Cooper was questioning her on, at the beginning of the committee, she stated that her new job on the board is to help with the transition between the SDTC to the new NRC, which is the National Research Council of Canada. Now, the SDTC, what they used to do was they used to claim that they had full transparency, and they were publishing a list of all the projects that were funded since 2001 when the organization became a thing. So Cooper is asking, if that's what you guys used to do for the SDTC, are you going to still implement that when the NRC becomes active? And she's saying she doesn't know. Well, if that was the bar minimum of what you needed to do to keep the transparency at the same level, and now you're not sure if that's what you're going to be doing, even though you're the one helping with the transition into this new organization, well, that indeed is actually the opposite of transparency. That's less transparency. And so Cooper has a point in saying that the Liberal government is trying to bury everything. And we can see that with the documents, how everything was redacted. The documents aren't even being brought in or sent to the RCMP. Again, they're trying to bury it. And if Parliament gets prorogued, then I think everything gets locked in time or frozen until basically the spring of next year, which is more corruption being buried. Now, one thing she was kind of honest with was that the last set of questions by Mr. Brock, he asked her about the documentations themselves that the STDC sent over to the government, if they were all redacted or not. Because last week, Mrs. Doyle, who was another board member, said that she didn't think any of them got redacted. Well, this lady confirms that that wasn't true. There was some that was redacted, but this seemed like the most transparent that she ended up being throughout this whole thing.
Our fourth round, Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, on the issue then of corruption, it's no small wonder that the opposition parties, collectively all the opposition parties, voted in favor of an order for more transparency. And what that entailed was essentially ordering documentation from the government, documentation from the Auditor General, documentation from the SDTC to shed more light. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, essentially said that sunlight was the best way to promote transparency and accountability. He ran on that in 2015. The order of the House was made June the 10th, 2024. On June the 11th, the Clerk of the Court sent letters to the Clerk of the Privy Council, the CEO of SDTC, and the Auditor General of Canada to inform them of the order. It was to be received, the documents to be received by July the 10th, 2024. And no small surprise, given the level of corruption and secrecy behind this, that a great number of government departments and subsidiaries essentially redacted pages, hundreds of pages of documents pursuant to the order, which is the opposite of transparency and accountability. And of note, I note the Canada Revenue Agency, heavily redacted, the Innovation, Science and Economic Development, heavily redacted, National Research Council, heavily redacted, Justice Canada, and the Privy Council Office. Now, I want to confirm from your perspective the documentation that SDTC provided pursuant to this order was completely unredacted. Is that accurate? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, we have provided all of the documents requested by Parliament. A very small number were redacted based on solicitor-client privilege alone.
Redacted on the basis of identity and addresses and personal information, or some other reason that you can't get into?
Mr. Chair, the only documents that were redacted by SDTC were documents that included solicitor-client privilege, which is essentially legal advice. We provided 10,000 documents. I believe around 300 of them included some redaction for
300
legal
pages.
advice. Yeah,
Okay.
legal advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you part of that process of gathering up the documents, reviewing it, consulting with lawyers on the basis of what redactions, if any, would be made? Was that a decision made by you and the board?
The board directed staff and council to fully comply with the order.
Okay. And did you or any other member of the board actually review the documents, the some 10,000 pages of documents, prior to its release to the government?
Mr. Chair, those documents were reviewed by staff and council under the direction of the board to fully comply with the order of Parliament.
And so there you have some new information. I would take it with a grain of salt because this lady doesn't seem trustworthy, but she's claiming out of the 10,000 documents that were sent over, only 300 had been redacted. Yet clearly from the report that the Conservatives and all the other members got, this thing got just obliterated with ink. They really tried to cover everything up. And as stated, that does not seem transparent to anybody. And if the Liberals don't have anything to hide, then why get everything redacted? Why not send it to the RCMP? All the party members are talking about it, and they're keeping the government basically paralyzed now until this motion gets put through. But hey, if you guys made it all the way to the end here, congratulations. Let me know in the comment section below. Type in turkey leg, as Thanksgiving is right around the corner. But I really do appreciate it if you did make it to the end. If you didn't, I understand. It was a long video. Maybe break it up if you can. But as always, really love to hear from you guys in the comment section below. And I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.